So hello and welcome back to tutorial 2. In this tutorial we're just going to dive right in and have a rough look at xCode and the programming interface and the environment that we'll be using. So go ahead and open xCode. What you get is an opening screen here. This will show you a list of your previous projects you've worked on, as well as give you the option to create a new one. That's what we're going to do right away here. Doing that, it opens up a section of all the different programming templates that xCode provides us. You're seeing on my screen something you probably don't on yours, which is Cocos 2D, which is something that I've worked on in the past, and it's a framework you actually need to install into the program. But what we're going to do is going to be focusing on game programming. You're going to click on the SpriteKit game template and click next to get to our next product. So the next screen we get to name our products. We're just going to call this one test game. You don't want to put spaces in your product name because later on it's going to be important. Organization name is whatever you'd like. I just called it myself. Company identifier. What Apple prefers us to do is use a reverse domain format. So if you do have a website or something that you could fake as one, that's what they like us to use here. Class prefix, if you entered in some form of characters here, what it would do is any class that you create within this game would have that prefix in it. It allows you to search things easier, and one other benefit is it allows you to keep your code separate from the code that Apple provides. And you'll never have any interferences or cross. So devices here, you can pick between universal, iPhone, and iPad applications. It's usually simpler to start with just one, so we'll choose iPhone for now. Choose somewhere to save your project. I usually just save it on the desktop. Source control, this is something you're never really going to use, so just leave it clicked off for now. And then click create. Okay, that brings us to the general information screen for the application. If you ever get lost and you're looking for this again, it is located right here. Just click the application name, and that brings you back to the screen. Some things that are important to note for now, device orientation. So this is how your application is going to perform, whether you'd like it to your user to hold the application sideways or right side up when they're using it, depending on the game. That'll be chosen by you. For now, let's just have a general look at the program. So if we go up to the top here, the xCode menu navigator, something that should, for every new programmer, would be good to see is this clean button right here. So whenever you build the application, the clean button just gives you a fresh start, lets you to clear away some certain errors. One other important thing to note is if you hold down the Alt key, it changes the option from clean to clean build folder. And what the build folder is over here in your build phases. These copy bundle resources here. So this is all the images and songs and sounds and anything that's in your game that's an actual file that you've imported shows up here. So sometimes xCode can get a little confused when you've added something to your project and it doesn't show up properly in its bundled resources. And you can usually fix that with a clean to the build folder. Link binary with libraries. This is where you would add additional frameworks into your game or your application. So for instance, in iOS 7, we now have the ability to have Bluetooth game controllers. So we could add the functionality for the game controller framework here, and that would allow us to use certain call functions and methods in order to get that right into our game. Likewise, in-app purchasing for StoreKit and so on and so forth. We'll go over all that a little bit later on. Some other things to show you are the storyboard. This brings us to Interface Builder. So for a few iterations, or quite a few iterations now, Interface Builder has given us a graphical way to represent the way our application is going to look. It's really handy. All you have to do is click and drag, and you can drop in different elements into your application or your game. So for instance, if we wanted a button, we could just drag out a button. Boom, it's done in our game. You can give your button certain characteristics. Like you can give it an image, so it doesn't have to be just your standard iOS 7 button. You can drag labels into it. Now you can just change out your label to say, I'm a label. Oops, if I could type it behind here. And now that's going to be in my application. All of your coding and your classes are going to be contained over in this section here. So the app delegate, view controller, this main scene of the game, they're all created for you by xCode. There's additional files down at the bottom here for supporting the frameworks, so everything you've linked shows up down here. So all of this has a ton of code in it that's handled by Apple. Something to show you. These are your main editor screens on the top here. So the standard editor is what you'll typically be working with. But you can click the assistant editor as well, and what that does, it allows you to look at two sections of your code simultaneously. It can be handy when you're trying to link or compare different settings between different classes, or if you're looking for inheritance structures and so on and so forth. This one over here is a version editor. That's one you typically won't be using working in single-man teams. Clicking on the bottom one here, this brings up an output log. So for instance, if we were to just say, for argument's sake, in our scene in the init statement here, if I was to add an ns log statement, so we'll say hello world for now. When we actually run this application, that will show up down below. And of course I did that incorrectly, because you need an at before the string. So don't worry too much about the code. We'll go over all that later. But long story short, just to kind of show people how things work, we're going to run this application with that button in the top. That's going to bring up the iOS simulator. And hello, here's the app. So you can see that the button and the label I dragged into the project are there, as well as background and this hello world. They're actually created in the code over here. You can see we've created a label. It's added it to the world, and it's called hello world. And also my little ns world or ns log statement there saying hello world, and shows up down the bottom here. Yeah, so this is the base project that's been created for us, and we'll move on to the next.